everybody. My name's Jamie Dunn, and I am the Communication Officer and also Educational Advisor at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. Thank you for coming or tuning in to our presentation about admissions tests. I'm going to give a basic introduction or overview of admissions tests for undergraduate study in the US, and then I'm happy to take your questions. Just a note, I am based in the UK. I'm based in London, so I may mention the UK as an example occasionally, but of course this presentation is open to all students. I mentioned I'm an Education USA advisor. Education USA is through the US State Department. It's a network of advising centers worldwide to support students interested in US study. So let's get started on the session. Just to introduce it a bit, again, I'm going to provide a brief overview of admissions tests for undergraduate study. Admissions tests are required for most, but not all, U.S. universities, so that's an important thing to consider. I know that for many international students, I know with the British students I work here in the UK, that it can be an adjustment and to get used to the style of testing and what they're testing on. But please don't let that be a deterrent to applying to study in the U.S. It involves some studying. It might involve 1 or 2 Saturday mornings, but once you're through it, think of all the amazing possibilities available to you in studying in the U.S. And some students do view it as sort of this rite of passage to take the SATs or ACTs. Also, a bonus of doing well on one of these exams is that it makes you stand out in the U.S. university applicant pool, or if you're applying for a scholarship program, it makes you stand out to them as well. So again, some things to consider when thinking about admissions tests. But let's just get started. So what's required? What tests are available? What's out there? Well, as I mentioned, most U.S. universities will require either the S80 Reasoning test or the ACT. And you want to think of it as sort of like Coke and Pepsi, that these are two competing tests, and that I've never seen an instance where a university prefers one over the other. I've seen most U.S. universities, if not all, accept both tests. So it's really up to you as a student to decide which you'd like to take, and we're going to walk through what's covered on them, and you can decide what's a better fit for you. Excuse me. The most competitive universities, in addition to the SAT Reasoning test or the ACT, may say we'd like to see 1 to 3 SAT subject tests. Or they may say, if you take the ACT with writing, 1 subject test. So there's various combinations that U.S. universities may require. And again, it's usually the most competitive that will say, in addition to the SAT Reasoning or the ACT, we'd like to see some additional testing. The way that you know how much testing you have to do, bottom line, is you have to go to the U.S. University website. You go to the admissions page on the website, and you find out what's required of students and what's required of international students. If you're ever unsure, I would contact the university directly. A lot of students write to us and say, well, I want to go to X university or Y university, what do they require? I know some of you may be wondering that as well. And it really is up to each individual university, so it's for you to do a little bit of research. Well, when it comes to the SAT subject test, which we'll talk about in a moment on a further slide, I do want to note that most of the time, most U.S. universities want you to take the tests that you will do the best in. Occasionally, you'll come across an institution that will specify which subject test they're looking for. Sometimes that's, for example, if you're applying to a very, like a research institution, maybe that's very science or math oriented, they may say, we want to see you take the science or math subject test, but usually you can pick what you'll do the best in. Of course, if you're not from an English language-speaking country, if English isn't your first language, they may ask you to take an English language exam, like IELTS or TOEFL. So that's, again, for you to clarify with the university. But today the focus will be on the SAT and ACT, and I have to admit, being in the UK, the English language tests aren't my forte necessarily. However, if you're an international student, like for example we see in the UK, international students who English is a second language, but they moved over to the UK and they're doing their A-levels or they're doing their high school diploma in the UK. If you have moved to an English language speaking country or going to an international school where you're being taught in English, you may ask the university if you can waive the requirement of taking the English language test, since you've been demonstrating you're capable of doing schoolwork in English. So that's something, again, for you to discuss with the university. Something also I want to note is that there are some universities that do not require an admissions test, the SAT or ACT. There's an unofficial website that lists these types of universities that you may want to consider, though I'd always confirm with the university itself. It's called fairtest.org. And again, it lists institutions that don't require admissions tests because, there's certainly some people that don't do very well in testing or struggle with it, and they may prefer to apply to one of these institutions. So again, you'll want to confirm with the university, but it's something you may want to look into. So let's move on to the next slide. Do I really have to study? And we get asked that a lot in our office. Or, why am I taking these tests I'm already doing in the UK? They have something called A-levels, which is a very rigorous qualification at high school level. Why do I have to take this additional testing? Well, it's actually used in U.S. admissions in several ways. First, it's used to determine your academic potential. As you know, or as you're finding out through the webinars, that U.S. admissions is done holistically. And so they're not only going to look at your academic marks and your grades, but they're going to consider an admissions test. They're going to consider your essays, your extracurriculars. And so an admissions test is just another component, another factor for U.S. admissions counselors to consider as they're looking at you as an applicant. And so it's one way for them to measure, again, your academic potential. Also, for U.S. universities, it's a common denominator. It's a common benchmark or constant through the admissions process. So, as you can imagine, with U.S. universities, they're getting applicants from all over. And in the U.S., there is no national set curriculum like there might be in other countries. Each state sets its own curriculum. So how do you compare a candidate from Kansas with someone from New York when they're studying maybe different things? And so universities needed this constant, and that's where the admissions test comes in. It's something that everyone would potentially take. And now it applies to international students. How do you compare a student from Japan with one from Brazil? Again, it's something. This is the common factor they would all be taking. Also, admissions tests are helpful because it counters any type of grade inflation or concerns about grade inflation from a school or country, because again, it's up to the student to show their own academic potential. How will it be used in the admissions process? Again, it allows a student to set themselves apart, show their academic potential, helps them maybe get to the top of the pile. If they have pretty good grades, good extracurriculars, but they do outstanding on an admissions test, again, it could help set them apart. Also, it might be helpful if you suppose you don't do as well in a subject in school. Maybe you are studying German, and just on the day of your final exam, you're just not feeling well, you're just having a bad day, you don't do as well, you end up getting a B in German when you normally would be getting A's. It doesn't, doing well on the SAT subject test in German doesn't necessarily erase the fact that you got a lower grade in your German class, but it can help counteract it and can help balance it out a bit and show that you have the potential to do well in this subject. So that's one reason why maybe taking these tests is important. Another thing is because, again, with the way that U.S. universities work, sometimes financial aid or scholarship money is awarded to the most academically talented students that apply. And again, this could be a factor when, if they have some scholarship money or some funding, they might say, wow, look at this great candidate. Not just the admissions test score, but all these other factors line up really well. Sometimes, students ask us at our seminars and, in advising, what's the magic number? What do I have to score if I want to get to Harvard or Yale or this university or that university? And there is no magic number. U.S. admissions, I'll say it again, is done holistically. And so even if you get a perfect score, it doesn't guarantee you entrance to somewhere. And even if you don't do quite as well as you'd hoped, it doesn't deny you entrance. Again, it's done holistically. So let's talk about the SAT for a moment. I'm talking about the SAT Reasoning test. It's going to test you in critical reading, math, and writing are the subjects, and this exam will test you on your critical thinking skills and your reasoning skills. It's made up of 10 sections. 9 are scored and 1's unscored, and that just means that sometimes when College Board, the organization that administers the SAT, when they are thinking of using new questions, basically, they will include some of those questions in an unscored section. You won't know which section it is, so you want to do your best on all of them. It's just for them to try out these new questions. It will last about 3 hours and 45 minutes, so it is a long exam, and that's why you actually are not allowed to take the SAT reasoning test and any subject tests on the same day. It just would be too much testing. It would be exhausting for anyone. So again, it's a 3-hour, 45-minute test, and if you do take subject tests, will need to take them on a separate day. As I mentioned, it'll test you in critical reading, math, and writing. The critical reading section, you'll have reading passages and sentence completion tests. Math might test you in algebra, geometry, stats, and probability. Writing section includes a short essay prompt and multiple choice questions sort of on identifying errors or improving grammar and usage. The remaining dates for the 2013-14 academic year would be in May and June. As you can see, I have all the dates or the months that typically have the exam. As far as I'm aware, I don't know the dates yet for the 2014-15 academic year, but I would imagine, it's going to be likely the same months, and it would be around the same time of that month next year. So, for example, if the tests are towards the beginning of the month, I would imagine it would be towards the beginning of the month next year. They usually release the dates and allow you to register in the late spring, so maybe around late May, possibly June. The fee for testing, and this is something I really want to point out. Please don't look at it and just go, oh, it's $51 and that's it. There is a base fee of, for example, with the SAT, $51, but then as an international student, you'd have to pay a non-regional fee, which differs between regions. So you want to look up to see what your region would cost. It might be between $35, $40, something like that. And then there might be also additional fees, like if you register late or sending off your scores. So it can add up a bit. So make sure you're keeping track of these upfront costs. If you're taking the subject tests, there'll be a $24.50 basic fee, and then there might be again some of these additional fees as well. You can register for the test on collegeboard.org, and when you're registering, one of the questions will ask where you located, and then once you plug that in, it'll show you the testing centers in your country, and then if testing center's full, it'll say that versus if it still has seats open. How is it scored? What's the score you might get on the SAT? Well, each section of the SAT, again, critical reading, math, and writing, will be scored on a 200 to 800 point scale for a possible total of 2,400. You'll also get 2 subscores on the writing section, a multiple choice score from 20 to 80, and an essay score from 2 to 12. For the subject tests, so that's the SAT reasoning test, and again, just to reiterate, most U.S. universities will require either the SAT reasoning test or the ACT. And again, only the most competitive may require subject tests in addition to that. So if you have to take a subject test, it's important to know that they're about an hour long. There are about 20 different tests available, and they range in subjects from, you can look on the College Board website, but math, science, languages, history, so you can choose what would be a best fit for you. Again, most U.S. universities just want you to pick the test you do the best in, but again, some may specify, especially if they're science or math oriented, that they want you to take a science and math subject test. That being said, I would certainly encourage you to be wise in your choices. So, for example, if you are an English language speaker, but one of your parents is French and you speak French at home, taking the French subject test may not necessarily impress greatly the U.S. admissions counselor. You can take it and do hopefully you would do very well on it and show that, but if you're trying to show off your academic potential, that wouldn't be quite as impressive as if you had done it in another subject. Also, U.S. history is one of the topics, but when we talk to admissions test tutors, they certainly give a good point that it's U.S. history taught from a U.S. perspective. So unless you went to an American school abroad or an international school, you might be taught U.S. history, even if you're a big fan of U.S. history, from a different type of perspective than a U.S. student would be taught it. So I would look at the practice test questions very carefully to see if you feel confident in doing well on that test. What I also advise students, and this is applicable for not just in the UK, but for UK students, they're doing what's known as A-level, and I know that's available in other parts of the world. And I say, if you're doing an A-level subject, you might want to do your SAT subject test in that subject, and maybe consider doing your testing around the same time you're doing your A-level testing, because if you're already revising and studying for your A-level topic, it just lends itself to that. So, for example, if you are doing an A-level in French, taking the French subject test around the same time you take your AS level test would make sense. So I'm just going to move on from the SAT for a bit and talk about the ACT. So like I said, there's the SAT reasoning test, there's also the ACT, and again, I've never seen an instance where a university accepts one but not the other. So you just need to figure out which test is better fit for you. The ACT will test an English, math, reading, science section, and an optional writing section. And it's more of a curriculum-based test. The English section will test you in mechanics like punctuation, grammar, and usage, sentence structure, that type of thing. And it also tests you in organization and style. And the test will consist of passages, reading passages for this section, accompanied by multiple choice questions. The math section will have basic formulas and also test your math skills, of course, in answering these problems. Reading, they might have direct statements or implied statements, and it's just about analyzing those passages. Science reasoning, I think a lot of students are concerned about this. It's not necessarily what you think it might be. It's not necessarily advanced chemical equations. It's more about interpretation, analysis, and evaluation. And also problem solving in that section. And then lastly, with the optional writing section, it consists of one writing prompt that defines an issue and then describing 2 points of view on that issue. The dates, as you can see, it's throughout the year, similar to the SAT, but the remaining dates for this year would be April and June. Technically, there is a February exam, but I know in the UK and in other countries it's not offered, so I'm not quite sure if it's offered anywhere abroad, but again, you'll want to double check based on your own country. And when you register for the ACT, it's very simple. You put in that you're doing international registration and where you're based, and it'll come up with the test dates and test centers available. The ACT actually do publish in advance what the testing dates are for the following year, so you can go ahead and plan ahead for that. How it's scored is that on each section it's scored 1 to 36, and then basically you get a composite score, which is an average of those section scores. So that's a little bit about the ACT, and again, you can go to the ACT website to find out more about that. Oh, one thing I did want to note is that with the cost of the ACT, again, you'll have this basic cost for if you decide not to take the writing section, or as I imagine most of you will do, take the writing section part of the exam. So a lot of students ask us, do I take the SAT or the ACT? And they want us to choose for them, and we just can't. You have to take the test that's going to do, you're going to do better in, that's a better fit for you. So how do you decide that? Well, first we recommend take practice tests and compare your results, of course, or at very least do practice questions. Look at the content on both tests. Look at the format on both tests, and decide what's a better fit for you. For example, you're able to download practice tests from their websites or online. Maybe you might want to buy a book off of Amazon or another book selling website and do the practice tests found in there, and again decide what's the better fit. There's slightly more advanced math, and of course the science reasoning section on the ACT, so if you're more math or science minded, perhaps you'd prefer that, but you don't necessarily have to be in order to do the ACT. But some people may prefer the style of the ACT with long sections versus the short sections that vary in the SAT. Another determining factor, I know it happens in the UK, is the availability of testing sites. If all the testing sites for a certain test are full for you, then obviously you wouldn't be able to sign up for that test. So that can obviously be a determining factor, as well as available timing. So for example, in the UK, tests fill up very quickly, and so therefore again, that could be a determining factor of which test you therefore take. So what are some tips for success on these admissions tests? We've talked to our staff and our advisors here, and we came up with 5 top tips that our staff would say. The first is register early. Like I said, sometimes testing centers can fill up very quickly, and it's much better to take a test close to home than having to go to another city, or even I've heard some students going to other countries to sit the test. So it's an early Saturday morning. You don't have to be driving somewhere far away. So register early as soon as you know that you're going to be sitting the test. Also, I think registering early gives you, if you know you have a date when you're definitely taking a test, it gives you a goal to work towards, to strive towards, and helps you prepare a study schedule. The second tip I would say is to develop a study plan. Certainly everyone's different. The content of these tests may be more difficult for some, but just getting used to the format in itself can be a bit tricky. So for some people it might just be a matter of brushing up on their math or their verbal skills or reading, but it's always good to come up with a plan. Some students say to us that they just want to go to the test and just take it and see how they do, which, to be fair, if they just wanted to see how they do, they should really just take advantage of the free resources available, the free practice tests available. Sit down, take the test, time themselves at their kitchen table, and take it. Because again, you're not have to pay to go to the exam, and also some U.S. universities do want to see your scores from every time you've taken the test. How else can you prepare through this study plan? Again, take advantage of the free resources available. Sometimes these testing sites will do a question of the day type thing, or again, provide free practice problems. Again, you might want to order a book offline that has practice tests and tips on taking these tests. If you feel like you're really struggling, you're not quite getting the scores that you're looking for, you may want to hire a test tutor to help. For some students, maybe hiring a test tutor isn't an option. Maybe they don't have the funds available to do that. So what we recommend is, if, for example, you're studying with 1 or 2 concepts in the math section, to maybe talk to a teacher at your school, maybe pull them aside and say, do you mind spending an hour after school with me and showing me how to do these types of problems. And hopefully your school would be supportive in that endeavor. Another tip we recommend is, of course, to take practice tests. I've said it a couple times, but I'm going to say it again, just to get used to the timing and format. Again, because maybe the content isn't necessarily that hard for you, but getting used to multiple choice testing, the time testing can be a bit stressful for students, so getting used to that. Some students have never experienced before doing multiple choice and filling in what are known as Scantron answer sheets, so doing that as well. On the day, make sure you arrive early. I'm that type of person who always gets to the airport, 3-4 hours early. So be that person. Do not come rushing in late, and I'll tell you why. One, if you're late, it's very stressful. You're going to come into the test and feel already stressed and panicky and not feel settled. And two, if you come actually late to the test, you might not get a seat because there are going to be other students there who are doing what's known as standby testing, sort of like before you go on a flight, standby flights, where they maybe registered too late and they're waiting to get a place. And if you are 1 minute late, they're going to give that place to another student. So whatever you do, I know, we joke to students here in London that, please, 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 just aim to get there as early as you can to make sure that you're stress-free when you arrive. And of course, make sure you bring everything that you need. Maybe pack your bag the night before with your ID, pencil, the ticket that you need for entry, etc. Make sure in the morning, I know it's common sense, but I have to say, make sure you have a good breakfast. If it's a long day, it's a long test, and you don't want to be thinking about food instead of the math problem in front of you. And of course, wear comfortable clothing so you're comfortable while you're testing. Another tip for on the day is to maybe consider before leaving home to go to the test center to maybe do 1 or 2 warm-up practice problems just to get your mind flowing and to get into that mindset of testing. The last tip I want to suggest is it's okay to take multiple tests. This is a question we get a lot. It is common for U.S. students to take it, at least 2 times. Again, just to improve their score. Maybe they take it during their second to last year, their penultimate year, and then maybe they take it in their autumn of their final year. So that's absolutely fine. It's maybe when you start to take it 6, 7, 8 times that maybe getting that really good score becomes less impressive to the university. So, but 2, 3 times is quite common. So, that is my basic presentation and introduction to admissions tests. I noticed that we've gotten a couple questions into the question box, so I'll just take a moment and go through them if you just bear with me. But if you have any more questions, just go ahead and write them in. So let's see what this first one says. It says, what is testing about? I think we've covered that during the presentation. Again, the reasons why universities use them, how they use them, and what's included. So I hope this person does not mind, but I might just skip that one. We have another question about how I can get a scholarship. That's maybe a different topic than the webinar today. I could note that funding is usually incorporated into the U.S. admissions process. Usually when you apply, there are 2 types of funding. There's merit-based scholarships from U.S. universities, and there's need-based funding. So you want to investigate which or both funding the university offers. But I did say in the beginning of my presentation that if you do well on an admissions test, it can help you stand out for possible scholarships. So that might be a different topic for a different day, but it is important to note. Let's see. Next question. Again, we have maybe a different topic for a different day. It's about dentistry and doing medical degrees in the U.S. Just to note that medicine is studied at the postgraduate level in the U.S. I know in some countries it's studied as a first degree or undergraduate level, and that's a different type of testing. Today's I'm just focused on undergraduate testing. To do a dental degree, you'd have to do a first degree and then a test to get into dental school. And I would check to see if it's available in your country. But I could go much more into depth into medicine, but for today's topic, we'll just stick to admissions tests. question about which language test is used in U.S. university admissions, and that's something, again, that's dependent upon each university. So unfortunately, you'll have to check each individual university's website, the admissions page. They'll likely have an international student admissions page. If you're confused, you don't see it, please, please, please don't hesitate to write or call the admissions office to make sure you're taking the appropriate exam and getting advice on where you could take it in your country, or talking to the Education USA office in your country. We have a question about nursing, but again, I don't know if it's appropriate for this webinar. Please talk to the Education USA office in your home country, just because they'd be better able to inform you and instruct you about that. We have a question about when should I take the test to apply for fall 2015 or autumn 2015. That's a really good question. Thanks for that. That is up to you. I mean, at the very least, you want to work backwards from the admissions deadline. So if you're looking to start in autumn 2015, most early deadlines would be in autumn, so around November 2014, and then the regular admissions deadlines would probably be around January. So if you know you need your scores by January, then you know you at the very least need to take the tests in the autumn. It usually takes a couple weeks to get your scores back, so it doesn't take very long. So you just want to work backwards from there. That being said, I would recommend, if possible, taking the test if you feel prepared for it, perhaps in the spring of your second to last year of school. Because if something happens, if you don't do as well as you wanted, you still then have the summer to study and prepare, and then take one last chance in the autumn to take a test. So that would the answer I'd be for timing. We have a question about, for pre-medical school, can I take the SAT? Again, medical school is actually a postgraduate degree in the U.S. I know that sometimes students hear about being pre-med as a major at the undergraduate level, but actually, again, medical school and becoming a medical doctor would be a postgraduate level. If you're doing pre-med or any major, any topic at the U.S. university, they'll expect the same type of admissions as usually as other majors. So yeah, they'll ask you to take the SAT or ACT. The MCAT, the medical exam for medical school, is again after you've done, is when you're looking to do that postgraduate graduate degree. In the UK, graduate school and postgraduate are interchangeable. So sorry about that. So when you're going to graduate school, you do the MCAT. But if you're interested in pre-med, talk to the university, find out if there are any additional requirements, but it would probably be the same way that any other student would be applying to that university. I had a question about, if there's any scholarships to take English language tutoring because you want to take the TOEFL or IELTS. I would maybe talk to the Education USA office in your country or region, because they might have a bit more information about English language testing, and also if there's any funding available for English language programs. As you can imagine, based in the UK, it's not my forte necessarily, but talk to your Education USA center. They'll likely have information available about that. Sorry about that. Again, we have a question about which one is better to take, the SAT or ACT. And I have to reiterate, it's really up to you. I've never seen a university say, or hear a university say, I'd rather have X test. In fact, what most U.S. universities may have is what's known as a concordance table. So what that means is if a student takes the SAT, that score, they'll compare that to if a student had taken the ACT, what that score would look like. So, for example, 2100 on the SATs would be equal to X amount on the ACT. So they really don't care, basically. It's like Coke and Pepsi. It's just two competing brands. Um, that being said, like, take the test that you feel you'll do better in. And as I said, we came up with a strategy of taking tests, practice tests, looking at the content on the tests, and determining which is a better test for you and which you'll feel you'll do better in. We have a question about, is IELTS necessary for international students if your medium of instruction has been in English? And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that if you're an international student, either going to a school where you're being taught in English, or you are an international student who've moved to an English-speaking country, I would write to the universities and just ask if the English language test requirement can be waived. And sometimes they will. If you've demonstrated, hey, I've done my A-levels in English, I think I'm capable of doing schoolwork, certainly they'll understand that. But it's up to each university, so you'll have to write to them individually. I think this will be my last question. It's, should I take the SAT subject test as well? And again, that's up to each university. So again, most U.S. universities, but not all, will require either the SAT Reasoning test or the ACT. And usually the most competitive may require, in addition to the SAT Reasoning or ACT, 1, 2, maybe 3 subject tests. Or they may say if you do the ACT with writing, you only have to do 1 subject test, something like that. But again, it's up to each university to decide, and that's how you'll know if you have to take the subject test. I think that was the last sort of question that was applicable for the webinar. I hope you have found this helpful, and it's been a good introduction to admissions tests at the undergraduate level. And thank you so much for tuning in, and best of luck applying to study in the U.S.